Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 2022 and a whole host of new webinars. And there will be some changes. We will let you know as they happen. For now, everything continues as it was. Our guest speaker this afternoon needs no introduction, and I'm not going to waste her time. Dr. Melodie de Jager is going to talk about primitive reflexes and the development of vision. So over to you, Melodie. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Melinda, Hazel, and Karen. Always wonderful to be here. Welcome. I would love to see the white of your eyes, but maybe in the foreseeable future, we can actually see each other at some stage. But I'm Melodie de Jager from the Mindfulness Institute and the Baby Gym Institute. So it's a research and training institute where we focus on learning for all ages. And in this pursuit of learning excellence and not striving for people, children, adults, to score 80% or even 100% for everything, but just to learn with greater ease. Because at the Institute, our definition of learning is the ability to adapt. And I find it a helpful definition, because learning is not just about writing and reading. It's very important. But learning is the ability to adapt. And the ability to adapt starts very, very early. It actually starts in utero. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk about the development of vision from an infant's perspective. In other words, how do we understand, based on the primitive reflex system, how do we interpret the role of the primitive reflexes in the development of vision? And afterwards, those of you who want to ask questions, because I need to dash just before 6 o'clock, probably 2 minutes to 6. If you want to pop questions in the chat box and you want to add your email address, I will respond to each and every question if we don't get to it during the session. So without further ado, let's talk about primitive reflexes. So the average newborn baby can see objects around them about as well as you can see into the future, which is to say, they really can't see much. I really think Emily is onto something. What an amazing quote. And she then also posted this clip to indicate the development of vision in the first couple of months, which I found fascinating. How it goes from absolutely a suggestion to blurry to slowly more clearly, and then towards the end to be able to really see the way, or similar to the way that we do as adults, because really we don't all see the same either, do we? So when we talk about the development of the nervous system, we can't talk about the development of vision without talking about the development of the nervous system. So when we talk about the nervous system, we need to just define it quickly. I prepared this talk for lay people, not for professionals. So if those of you who know your physiology and anatomy, and don't be bored, but let me just explain it in a very simple way. Okay, so the central nervous system comprises of the brain and the spinal cord. We often think the brain is up here. No, we are sitting on our brains, and that part of our brain, which is the bottom part of the spinal cord. So that is why it's so incredibly important that we keep on moving. Because when you move, you actively stimulate brain function. But that is a talk for another day. So the brain is marvelous, but it sits in its ultimate isolation chamber, and it's absolutely vulnerable to sensory input for development. So the senses send input to the brain processes that information, and the brain then sends output via the muscles. So the baby, the toddler, the child, the student, the adult, the senior citizen can act. So behavior is a product. It's a product of sensory input, processing in the central nervous system, and muscle output. And that results in specific behavior. And if your behavior is appropriate, you get a star, get positive feedback. If the behavior is inappropriate, then obviously we get some feedback on that as well. And that gives us the opportunity to re-look, re-listen, adapt, learn, and change our behavior. So our senses and our muscles are also part of the nervous system, but they're part of the peripheral nervous system. So the peripheral nervous system, in terms of the senses, feed into the central nervous system, brain and spinal cord, and the brain and spinal cord feeds into the muscles. So it's a beautiful, beautiful loop. But I don't want to talk about diagrams. I want to talk about people. And I definitely want to talk about babies and not infants this afternoon. I love the word baby. So if you look at this little baby sitting up with a pretty straight back, though that head is moving and looking all over, those eyes are curious. The hand is holding onto the hands are holding onto the feet, but let's not read too much into that for the moment. What is very important is this little young man has accomplished and reached certain milestones, because every milestone that a baby reaches is an indication of a maturing brain. So the moment something has happened in the brain already, there's a change in behavior. So behavior doesn't change, and therefore the brain changes. The brain needs to change before behavior can change. And because behavior has changed, it reinforces the change in behavior in the brain, and that's how we develop skills. So quickly going to talk about the different senses, and we're going to link them to primitive reflexes. But let me just quickly say something about a primitive reflex. There are many reflexes. You know, there's the gagging reflex. There's the doctor uses the little hammer to hit you on the knee or on the elbow or round about the ankle. There's a simple reflex reaction. Okay, I'm not talking about those. There are intrauterine reflexes. Now, those reflexes emerge in utero while the baby is still in utero. And the purpose of those reflexes is to develop the baby in utero and to assist the baby during birth. But for the baby to be able to progress through birth and then through development in the first couple of months in life, those intrauterine reflexes need to go to rest first. So simple reflex, we've got them for life, unless there's some serious injury, neurological injury. And it actually indicates a healthy neurological system. Intrauterine reflexes are responsible to aid the development of the nervous system in utero and to assist with labor and the birth process. And then we get to the primitive reflexes. Now, primitive reflexes start in utero for the same reason as the intrauterine reflexes. They start in utero to develop the nervous system systematically, obviously the baby as well, but we focused on the development of the nervous system this afternoon because we're talking about vision. And as you know, the eyes are two protruding parts of the brain, which is part of the central nervous system. So the eyes are protruding parts of the brain. It's fascinating. So we have to talk about the brain and the nervous system. But we want to look at the sequence of development. And because the brain is in the ultimate isolation chamber and it's so reliant on sensory input, it's very important to look at the development of the sensory systems in utero and the first couple of months after birth. I think you would agree with me that many children or many parents of many children and teachers complain that children are sensory. Often when I hear a person say, my child is sensory, I want to say, yes, I'm so glad, because if your child wasn't sensory, the senses weren't working. But what they're actually saying, the senses are hyperactive or hypoactive. The senses are overly active or underactive. And when the senses are overly active or underactive, research at the Baby Gym and Mindfulness Institute in Johannesburg, we found that it correlates with aberrant primitive reflexes. Aberrant, meaning they're active when they're supposed to go to rest. So a primitive reflex, an intrauterine and a primitive reflex, has a limited lifespan. So it emerges to develop, to connect a specific sensory system to a specific part of the brain using a specific couple of muscles and stereotype movements. So the purpose of an intrauterine and the primitive reflexes that we're going to discuss this afternoon, there are hundreds of other reflexes. We're just talking about a few this afternoon. The few that we've found are seriously involved with the development of vision. So the purpose of intrauterine and primitive reflex is to emerge, to connect a sense to the brain and the brain to specific muscles through doing a very specific kind of movement. So it's a simple thing. And it happens without the baby being aware of it. So it's unconscious. You know, it's nature's way. It's the beauty of biomimicry. If we leave nature to be, very often it's the most amazing teacher. You see, the reflex system is triggered without the knowledge of the parents. So it's not reliant on the education level or the interest level of parents. It happens spontaneously. Why? Because nature has this amazing thing that it wants all human beings to thrive. And for that reason, the primitive reflexes emerge in a very specific sequence. It's a little bit like a relay race. Some of it happens simultaneously. Watch a relay race. The one that's running is running flat out. The one that they're going to pass the baton to starts running. So there's a simultaneous process. But the moment they pass the baton, the next one runs flat out, and the one that's just done its best sits down and relaxes. That's how the reflex system works. So there's a lot of parallel processing, but there's a very progressive sequence as well. And at the Institute, we look at the emergence of proprioception and touch as two of the four somasomatic sensations. In other words, we don't look at pain and we don't look at temperature. We only look at proprioception and touch. And the reflex, intrauterine reflex, that's associated with the development of proprioception and touch is the withdrawal reflex. It's intrauterine. It has to go to rest before the baby is born. Otherwise, it may actually prolong labor and it may create havoc once a baby is born and the baby is avoiding touch. How do you comfort a baby if the baby doesn't like touch? How do you feed a baby if the baby doesn't like to be touched? How does the milk supply, the mom's milk supply, how is that encouraged? If a baby doesn't enjoy touch, therefore doesn't latch properly, therefore doesn't suckle properly, so it creates havoc. And for that reason, the withdrawal reflex emerges in utero. It develops proprioception and touch. What's the difference? Proprioception is like cameras all over the body. Everybody from the medical profession, please tolerate my explanation of proprioception. So proprioceptors are like cameras all over the muscles, all in the tendons, ligaments, joints, and in the skin, but not surface level, deep. And they are like cameras that constantly feed information to the brain, so the brain gets to know the body. What have I got? And where are they in relationship to each other at the moment? Imagine you need to catch a ball. If your brain doesn't, of course you can see your hands, but if you're looking somewhere else, if you watch people who are really good at ball sport, they do not watch the ball. They watch the players because they use their peripheral vision to play sport, and that's why they excel. So proprioception is an awareness of the body. They call it the body sense. So the brain knows what you've got, where are they in connection to each other. When we talk about touch, there's two kinds of touch. It's being touched, and the baby is being touched the entire time that the baby is in utero. Obviously, the uterine wall is touching the baby. Every time the baby moves, there's a form of touch. The umbilical cord touches the baby. And the pressure, the tightness of the womb, the size of the womb, also serve as proprioceptive input. So baby gets tremendous tactile and proprioceptive input while in utero. In utero, the sense of touch is more towards the baby. So the baby is receiving touch. There's also touch where the hand reaches out, and then the baby can feel whether it's a rough surface, smooth surface, mom's cheek, dad's cheek. The difference between that is something hot, is something cold. So we believe proprioception develops before touch, because unless the brain knows the body parts in relationship to each other, the brain very often gets overwhelmed, and the child's behavior shows overwhelm. And we say the child is very sensory. So at the Mindfulness Institute and the Baby Gym Institute, we spend a lot of time on proprioceptive input, stimulating proprioception, so the brain is a little bit more wise or intelligent in terms of processing sensory input, so it can locate it. If somebody's touching my shoulder, if you're really disorientated, if you've been ill and you've been really disorientated, had fever or something like that, it's difficult if you touch. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out where am I being touched. So proprioception helps to isolate a specific point of touch or contact, and that makes it easier for the child to cope with what's going on, and an adult and a person with low vision. But we'll get to low vision right at the end. So the withdrawal reflex emerges in utero, sensitizes the baby's skin to create a map of the body in the brain, because the baby needs that map to be able to feed, to latch and feed successfully. So the next sensory system to develop is the sense of movement. Movement is an action, but there's a sense of movement, and an anticipation movement, sometimes called kinesis. So it's that, some people call it interoception. It's that anticipation of how much force do I need to use, and in which direction to be able to perform a task well. Okay, so if you battle with vision, for example, right in the beginning, before you've adapted and learned how to work with low vision, you may find that you bang things on the table. You may find that you just miss the table, because it's very difficult to judge distance and force if your proprioceptive system is not working well and you use your eyes predominantly to orientate yourself in space. I want you to understand, we do use our eyes to orientate in space, but there are many other ways as well. So the sense of movement refers to the muscles and tendons and ligaments all over the body, including in the wrists. And the Morrow reflex, primitive reflex, is predominantly involved with the sensitization. It's building muscle tone as well, but it's that awareness. If you think of the Morrow reflex, what happens? The eyes fly open, mouth flies open, arms up, so does the legs, the fingers get splayed, and so do the toes. And very often there's an audible gasp. It's typically a fright reflex. The beauty of that reflex emerges around about 9 weeks after conception. But what is amazing about it, it's like when your car has a flat battery and somebody else comes and they bring their car and a set of battery cables and they jumpstart your car, and all of a sudden it's working. It's exactly how this works. The purpose of the Moro reflex is to jumpstart the entire nervous system, central and peripheral. Central, you know, brain and spinal cord. Peripheral, you know, sensory input and motor output. So it's a induna of a reflex, incredibly important. Has a lot to do with breathing rate, and associated with eating and speaking and disorders later. So the next sensory system to develop, the sense of smell and taste. They develop in tandem, and the rooting and sucking reflex is predominantly responsible to sensitize the senses of smell and taste, to orientate the baby towards the nipple to feed. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's wonderful. The eyes close, the mouth turns towards the source based on smell, not on sight. I'm sorry. And the moment that baby starts suckling, ideally on the breast, but if that is not possible, on a bottle or what other form of feeding the medical or healthcare professionals advise, the moment that happens, all the stress hormones that were secreted, all the adrenaline that was fired while the the Moro reflex was triggering, it all dissolves, and there's peace and calm. Isn't that fascinating? For as long as we seem to live, the senses of smell and taste have the biggest touch, movement, smell and taste, but smell and taste specifically, a tremendous impact on our emotional well-being. The sense of smell is the only sense that has, of all the senses, that has a direct plug-in to the limbic system. And that's why we often led by our noses, okay? So, going through the sensory system, next senses to develop is the sense of hearing. So the sense of hearing, the first paired senses, okay? Which reflex is responsible for that? It's the tonic labyrinth reflex, commonly known as the TLR. And this reflex has two movements. In utero, we call it the space-saving posture. It's a forward movement. In other words, as the head bends down, the arms and the legs flex, the eyes tend to close in a typical in utero position. But when the head moves backwards, the spine automatically extends, and the arms and the legs as well. So the tonic labyrinth reflex is associated with hearing, but it's the second vestibular reflex as well. The second one, the first one was the Moro reflex. The second one is the tonic labyrinth. And the last one is associated with the last of the senses to develop, which is the sense of sight. The sense of sight, ladies and gentlemen, is the last of the senses to develop. It's also a paired sensory system, two eyes. It's very advanced. And it uses the pathways developed through all the previous reflexes, the withdrawal for proprioception and touch, Moro for movement, rooting and sucking for smelling and taste, TLR, tonic labyrinth reflex for hearing. And now we're going to get to the ATNR. So the sight, the development of your visual system relies strongly on the development of the previous senses. And in this lies tremendous reassurance for a person who's battling to adjust to low vision. Because so often we feel that the moment you lose some of your vision, you feel your whole world is shrinking. But when we look at the sensory system, the development of the sensory system, when your sight is not as good as it was, I'm not saying it's not traumatic. I'm saying, but you've got all the other systems. But we need to pay attention to it because it needs to support our new learning in terms of sight. Sight and vision, is there a difference? Yes, there is. Sight is what you see through your eyes, and vision is strongly associated with what happens in your mind about what you've seen. And I've read a case study about a man in Alaska who he was born blind. And at the age of 56, the medical profession developed to such an extent that they could operate on his eyes and he could see. But do you know what happened? He died of depression within a year. Now, I find that so unusual. I would have imagined that he was so joyful because he gained so much. But he said the most profound thing that has always stayed with me, especially when I work with people, even babies, with low vision. The thing is, if you don't see from birth, it doesn't mean you don't see. You just don't see outside, but you've got internal vision. And it's extremely well documented how people with low and no vision are capable of developing maps and visual representation in their mind. They see in their minds. And his feedback was he died. Well, he didn't tell us that after he passed away, but part of it was a thesis. Part of the thesis was how he said that his internal world and the world that he could then see didn't match. So he constantly had to close his eyes to know what he was seeing. And he preferred the world inside. Fascinating. So the ATNR, asymmetric tonic neck reflex, is a very big reflex as well, because this is the reflex that's closely associated with academic performance. Because when the head turns to the one side, the arm and leg towards the same side extends and the other side flexes. When the head moves the other way, the opposite happens. In that way, developing to the one side and then moving to the other side is what we feel as a baby kicking around about 18 to 20 weeks after conception. Now the baby's kick is actually the triggering of the ATNR. And it's because the baby is a little bit bigger and because by then they are a little bit strong. And because it is such a distinct move with both arm and leg to the one side and then both arm and leg to the other side, it serves to develop laterality, sidedness, left and right, but it also serves to develop the midline between the left and the right side of the brain. What has this got to do with the development of vision? Hang in there. First, need to understand the sensory system and how the primitive reflexes tie in with that. And we need to look, so we've just looked at the senses, and because that's input to the central nervous system, and we're quickly going to look at the muscles, but we're not going to link it to each and every one of the reflexes. It's obvious that there's a muscular movement, there's a specific stereotype movement associated with each reflex. Like with the withdrawal, it's inching away like an amoeba. Remember, this is in utero. If a child is born and it's a younger child or a person that's recently suffered some form of injury or trauma and their vision is not as what it has been before, one tends to withdraw. And sometimes it's an active withdrawal, leave me alone. And sometimes it's just inching away, just leave me alone. Okay, the movement associated with the morrow follows the sequence of physical development, which is from top to bottom, top meaning the neck to the core. Okay, So the reflexes systematically. Morrow moves the head forwards and backwards, you can say up and down. And with that, it also has a direct impact on the development of the core muscles, okay? And then from the shoulders to the hands, and then from hips to feet. So from inside out. So, you see, the moment we look at a baby, and a baby is doing tummy time, as a baby gym instructor, this picture really, really makes me extremely happy. Watch the sensory system. Can you see how at peace this baby is with the touch of the clothes? I think he's wearing shoes. With touching himself, the texture of the carpet. Can you see how the sense of balance, how he maintains that head in an upright position? Smell and taste is not really appropriate here. I don't know what he's hearing, but watch those eyes. Can you see that this picture is a marvelous example of a little one whose visual development seems to be beautifully on track? There's only one thing as a baby gym instructor that I would like to change. And at that age, I would rather go for 3D than 2D pictures. So the senses and the muscles are developing wonderfully. Would rather place that baby in front of a mirror because it's in an interaction with other people and 3D real objects that more senses are developed. And when more senses are developed, man, there's a symphony orchestra playing in the brain. So 3D tummy time means a baby is not interacting with beautiful and stimulating white and black cards. There's a reason for that. But at the Baby Gym Institute, we would always advise against 2D at this age in favor of real objects. So look at that. Look at that. And you know, that happens pretty soon after birth. Does that baby really see mom? No. Does that baby really recognize mom? No, because the baby doesn't know what mom looks like. But that baby can hear the mom's voice because it's scared that she's talking. And that baby can recognize mom through his smell and the rhythm of her voice because she was, or he, was exposed to mom's movement, the rhythm of her voice, her body odor while that baby was in utero. So now the focus in this presentation is on gross and fine motor muscles, motor meaning muscles, and where does the primitive reflexes come in with that? And obviously now, when we talk, let me go back one, when we talk about gross and fine muscles, gross meaning the big muscles, those are the muscles that control your neck, that controls your core area, stomach and back. Gross motor muscles are those that attach your arms, your limbs to your body. So over the shoulder girdle, down the arms, over the hips, the thighs, and then the rest of the legs. So they are big muscles that hold the big bones of the body together. The fine motor muscles are the ones that we find at our extremities. Fine motor, the mouth is part of our fine motor muscles. That's why feeding is so closely associated with speech, because when that rooting and sucking reflex, well, let me go back one step. When the withdrawal reflex went to rest before the baby was born, and that baby was seeking touch instead of avoiding touch, that baby was latching and feeding better, rhythmically and more economically in terms of energy use. And therefore, it was stimulating mom's milk, and it was a match made in heaven. So the latch, the Morrow reflex, serves to open the mouth. The rooting and sucking reflex serves to close the mouth. Okay. Next, fine motor muscles, the hands. So the Morrow reflex opens the hands, and the palmar reflex, not necessarily associated with the development of vision, that's why I didn't include it this afternoon, serves to close the hands. The Morrow reflex serves to splay the toes, okay, to open the feet, to develop those muscles in extensive form, and then the plantar reflex, also a primitive reflex, not necessarily associated with the eyes, but one afternoon we can just talk about the relationship between the feet and visual development, but that's a talk for another day. So we said the mouth, the hands, the feet, and finally, the last of the muscles to develop in our body, gross and fine, are the muscles of the eyes. So isn't that magical? The eyes are the last of the senses to develop, but the eyes are also the last of the muscles to develop. And so now we're going to look at how each of those reflexes that were associated with the sequential development of the sensory motor system, how does the development or the emergence of that reflex, how does it support visual development? The moment the Moro reflex is triggered, primitive reflex goes to rest more or less 6 months after full-term pregnancy. So when that baby, when the Moro reflex is triggered, divergence is developed, and so is peripheral vision. Why? Because the baby got a fright and it's wondering, where's the enemy coming from? That sound they just heard. Maybe something fell. Maybe the hair dryer was switched on. Maybe somebody used one of these ridiculous leaf blowers that make such a racket. Maybe that baby is wondering, where in my environment is that noise coming from? And that serves to develop peripheral vision. And we said after the Moro, the next sense to develop are the senses of smell and taste, and the rooting and sucking reflex, primitive reflex, is involved with that. And during the process of rooting and sucking, eye-teaming skill, convergence, central and focal vision is developed. Isn't nature just so amazing? How every baby is set up to succeed. And there's a point to this, because if we understand how the visual system develops, my assumption is that we can follow a similar pathway to redevelop a visual system once there's a change. Even just getting glasses sometimes throws off the visual system completely, and it's helpful to know how to support the adjustment, how to support that adjustment period to be more comfortable and then move with more confidence in the environment. So after the piece of the rooting and sucking reflex, again, the TLR, which is another vestibular reflex, remember the Moro, the TLR, and the ATNR, all are a little bit frightening. They're really big moments. It's like a big moment in a symphony orchestra when they really, it's either the trumpet or the drum, or there's a big movement. So the TLR emerges around about 16 weeks after conception. And that's when the baby is in that space-saving position. And then it starts moving, because the baby at that stage is still very small. There's space in utero to bend the moment the head drops. The whole body flexes. The moment the head extends, so does the rest of the body. And so does the development of near and far vision, and far and near. Oh my word, but this can't be true, because what is there to see in utero? It's not about clarity of sight. It's about the physical structures associated with the development of vision. And that little baby can distinguish between light and darker patches. When you move into sunlight, or you come inside and it's a little bit darker inside, the baby is aware of changes in light. So there is visual stimulation in utero, but the focus with the reflex in utero is more vestibular than it is visual or auditory specific. But still, the substructures, remember, the eyes are the last to develop. We're still building the substructures to support vision on a sensory and a motor level. So also the tonic labyrinth reflex is strongly associated with the vestibulo-ocular reflex arc. Okay, so it is general knowledge, well documented, that when the vestibular system has matured, visual development is more profound. When the vestibular system or any of the other earlier sensory systems and muscles are underdeveloped, it automatically has an echo effect because there isn't a strong enough structure. Because remember, the visual system makes use of the nervous system that has been developed through the development of all the sensory systems and previous muscular systems. So the ATNR, also vestibular reflex. So vestibular system, let me just quickly go there. The vestibular system is centrally in the neck area and it's peripherally in the ears. Many people know about the vestibular system in the ears, but they're not aware of the central nervous system, the central vestibular system in the neck. So the Morrow reflex had a very specific head movement. The TLR is associated with a very specific head movement, and so is the ATNR. And so is the vestibular system developed, both centrally and vestibulary, to develop a solid tripod. So the eyes can work like a camera and really take clear, beautiful pictures. So the function of the ATNR is associated with the development of the following visual skills: eye-hand coordination, arm length focal vision, horizontal tracking, and ocular pursuit. Isn't that just mind-boggling? I had to use this picture. It was just such a beautiful indication of something else. At the Baby Trim Institute, we say the mouth is the first eye because so many skills are triggered through feeding. And when that mouth, remember the sequence of fine motor development, mouth, hands, feet, eyes, when the mouth has developed in a beautiful way, or it has developed properly, the chances are excellent that the hands and the feet pumped away while that mouth was sucking in originally, while the eyes were very often closed, and later on they focus on mom's eyes to make eye contact. Can you see how the development of one primitive reflex feeds into the next sensory system? And then we've got two postural reactions. Now, a primitive reflex needs to emerge, and they emerge in utero. They enable the baby to develop in utero. They assist with birth or during the birth process, and in the first couple of months in life to enable that baby to develop, irrespective of the parent's level of literacy or educational level. The reflex system automatically prompts that baby to develop and to systematically reach each milestone in sequence. Every time a baby reaches a milestone, it means that a sensory system has just matured. It coincides, it's associated. But once these primitive reflexes have gone to rest, because they've built the scaffold, they've built the tripod, there's a solid system now. They go to rest. Why? Why don't they die off? Because if there's any injury to any of those sensory systems, the intrauterine and primitive reflexes will re-emerge to repair. So they do a repair job as well. They do maintenance. But they should go to rest, because if they stay active, it is very difficult for the baby to reach its milestones. Very often we see delayed milestones or developmental delays. And in an older child, it's very difficult to concentrate and to control the emotions and to progress academically. So STNI is a postural reaction. So they're with us for life. And the first one, the STNR, symmetrical tonic neck reaction, is responsible for binocular vision and for vertical tracking. They sometimes call it the cat under the wire. So you see how the baby, it's actually the purpose of this pastoral reaction. The purpose of that is to strengthen the upper torso. So this baby is about to crawl. So nature is enabling it to raise the head, straighten the arms, but flex the bum. Then when the baby drops the head, it flexes the arms and raises the bum to develop the leg muscles in preparation for crawling. And once again, crawling is exceptionally well documented as a milestone and in association with the development of the visual system. And then the last one is the labyrinthine head right thing reflex. Okay. So it's that thing, you know, when somebody pushes you, you see it when people drive around the corner. You often see how they lean to the side, okay? But if you've got a very well-developed head righting reflex, when you turn, when somebody pushes you off balance, or when you stumble and you go off balance sideways, the head would automatically compensate to bring you up into upright position. Remember, the muscles develop in a predetermined sequence, neck before everything else. So head control leads all physical movement. And now we're in the final stretch. There may even be time for a question or two. I saw there was a raised hand earlier on, but let me just finish, and if there's time, I'll answer some questions. I love this picture. I love this picture because in the advert for this presentation, I spoke about the role of Belinda Lebowicz in my development as a developmental specialist in working in tandem with an occupational therapist specializing in low vision. So our fields of knowledge overlapped so beautifully. And I was not very good, or I did not work often, and it was not part of my training to work with anybody in low vision. And I really want to thank Belinda for my education. Couldn't have had a better teacher. But if you watch the little girl fourth from the left, watch how she holds on, because touch is very important. Moro reflex, muscle tone. Watch her body posture. Can you see it's a little tight? Yeah, because maybe she feels a little bit insecure at the moment. But isn't it marvelous that she's included in a group of children? Watch her holding on. Why? Watch her paying attention. You can literally see her listen to the voices because it helps her to orientate herself in space. Can you imagine if this little girl had an aberrant withdrawal reflex? Okay, remember there's a difference between sight and vision. She may have limited or no sight, but she can have lots of vision. But can you imagine if the withdrawal reflex was still running, making her hypersensitive to everything around her, or sometimes hyposensitive, it's like the skin is dormant. It's as though the skin isn't intelligent. It can't feel. So they often bump into things. Can you imagine if the Moro reflex didn't enable her to develop her gross and fine motor muscles and her vestibular system to give her such a beautiful upright posture? Can you imagine if the rooting and sucking reflex didn't do its job? Do you notice? She's biting her lip. And it's remember I said, it's an observation. It's not a scientific fact as far as I'm aware. But the moment the eyes are battling, we often find that the muscles of the one mouth is used, one mouth, two hands, 2 feet, 2 eyes. So the most primitive of the fine motor muscles is the mouth. So we often see people mouth, or they bite their lips, or they use their tongue or jaw to support the fine motor muscles of the hands, the feet, and the eyes, if that is appropriate. Can you imagine if her TLR didn't trigger, or it was still aberrant and it was overly active? She couldn't participate in a group activity like this because she would get overwhelmed. And what about the ATNR? Yes, the asymmetric tonic neck reflex is associated, it's the main reflex associated with the development of vision. But it's the last of the primitive reflexes because it uses the circuitry built by all the other systems. Can you imagine that it would be very difficult for her to have such a beautiful gait, that she would be able to stride relatively confidently and be part of a group, not excluded? Can you imagine if the STNR and the labyrinthine head writing reflex didn't do its job, or it hasn't triggered yet because some of the other primitive reflexes were still in play? Can you imagine how uncoordinated she would be and how difficult it would be to operate in her environment? You see, ladies and gentlemen, I believe the eyes are the most amazing gift we can get. But if they don't work optimally, we mustn't forget that we have a tremendous subsection that's ready to do our bidding. What happens too often when vision is impacted on, one's entire life shrinks, and with that, the functionality of the other senses, exposure, stimulation to the other senses, and the muscles and movement with confidence in the environment and the greater environment is inhibited as well. I hope from this presentation you realize there's a lot that can be done. Thank you. Any questions?
Grant is saying, thank you for this informative webinar. If I understood this evening's webinar correctly, we as people who have lost sight later in life can relearn to see again by relearning how to look, as with a baby learning to see, as a neurological pathway resetting.
Okay, remember, if there's structural injury or trauma, I am not in a position to say what will you be able to regain. What I am saying is there's a lot that can be developed. There's enormous room for in-depth research, looking at the is it ventricle and dorsal pathways, visual pathways, and how it ties in to the primitive reflex system. There's a field of research that's wide open, and I sincerely hope there would be somebody's starting research soon. Karen, what I would also do is I would follow up. I've placed an article on the web today, Belinda, and I don't know if I can just forward you a link and you can share the link.
Thank you.
And because that will be a summary for those of you who prefer to read. There would be a summary. It coincides with the presentation.
Great,
Excellent.
thank you.
Melodie, I think one of the things that, Grant just asked is that very often people don't realize that even very little vision can be used very efficiently. And that's the important thing, is that Absolutely. Because people have been told they have no vision, that's based on acuity, but it's not based on function. And Absolutely. If we can teach them to use that more, they're very effective.
Yes, and then Grant always goes on to say, thank you for the answer. Please inform me where I may go to find out about this. Thank you, Grant. So I guess we can start with the article that B is going to post.
Okay, I think what is really important and the biggest giveaway, I'll soon post another article with very simple SOS signals. SOS, pay attention. Signals, behavioral signals and postural signals that can indicate which reflex has re-emerged, primitive reflex has re-emerged. And then in the article, I suggested some physical mind movements that mimic the reflexive movements to reestablish and to repair some of the different circuitry. So I hope that will be helpful. I'm terribly sorry I have to leave. May I ask if there are questions that you just post them in the chat box with your email address, and I will reply to all of them. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you, Belinda. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Melodie, that was wonderful. And so our next talk will be feet of visual development. Right, guys.
Melodie,
Melodie, thank you so much. But before everybody else leaves, let's just see if there are some more questions that we can pass on to Melodie. But also there are a couple of things that we just want to discuss in terms of the webinars going forward. So we've had a request from the patients who join in that they would like to have more sessions, which we used to do before. And so we've decided that the last session of every month will be one geared towards patients, and that will be very much an interactive session. At this stage, it will just be for the patients, but it might well be very beneficial for professionals working with the visually impaired, but that won't be recorded, obviously, because we will have patients on it. And then we are looking at different options of how best to go forward. And as many of you know, low vision is now one of the, we're looking at a taxonomy for OTs in terms of low vision being recognized as one of the special fields of interest. So we're hoping to have as much education as possible in terms of CPD. So if there are any questions, let's have a look.
No, they're all thank yous, B. I've gone through them.
Excellent. So thank you very much, everybody. And next week's talk will be Karen talking on diabetes and COVID. Okay, is that the topic?
You, diabetes, COVID, and your eyes.
Good. Excellent. Excellent. So see you all next week. And yes, the recording will go out as soon as it's done. So that will be sometime next week. Thank you very much, everybody. Glad to see you all again. Bye.
Lovely to see everyone. Bye.